In the winter of 1566, a child was born who would one day become both the pride and the torment of two kingdoms. Sigismund III Vasa came into the world under the heavy shadow of history. His father, John III of Sweden, was a king of the north, strong and stern, the ruler of a kingdom of icy winds and long winters. His mother, Catherine Jagiellon, came from the great Polish-Lithuanian Jagiellon dynasty, bringing with her the blood of centuries of kings, queens, and rulers. From the very beginning, Sigismund's life was not ordinary. His cradle was gilded, his nurses and attendants carefully chosen, his first cries echoing in halls lined with tapestries depicting battles, saints, and the legacy of a dynasty that stretched back generations. Even as a baby, there were whispers among the courtiers. This child was destined for more than one crown. He carried within him the potential for a double kingdom, a union of Poland and Sweden. But dreams of unity, whispered quietly in palace corridors, would prove to be as dangerous as they were ambitious. Sigismund's early years were a balancing act between two lands. In Sweden, he learned the language, the customs, and the ways of the northern court. Snow blanketed the palace grounds for much of the year, and young Sigismund learned to navigate the cold marble halls, the long candlelit nights, and the stern discipline of Swedish nobility. Yet at the same time, he was tutored in the ways of Poland and Lithuania. He learned Latin, the language of diplomacy, and Polish, a language rich with the poetry and history of a vast, sunlit kingdom of plains, rivers, and forests. He learned the stories of knights, battles, and kings whose decisions had shaped the world long before his birth. From early on, Sigismund was aware of the weight upon his shoulders. He was not merely a prince. He was the bridge between nations, the vessel through which ambition, destiny, and pride would flow. He played with miniature swords and shields, as his tutors told him stories of kings who fought for their realms. He listened to tales of the great Swedish warriors and Polish lords, imagining himself commanding armies, raising banners, and sitting upon thrones taller than the tallest cathedral. It was not only the stories of kings that shaped Sigismund, but the constant reminder that he had two paths, two realms, two crowns waiting for him. In his earliest memories, he was told that he could one day rule Poland, one day rule Sweden, one day rule both. He heard court advisors whispering about the risks and rewards. Some feared ambition that spanned nations. Others admired the vision of unity, imagining a kingdom stretching from the icy north to the fertile plains of Poland. For Sigismund, however, there was no fear. Even as a child, he sensed destiny pressing upon him. He began to understand that compromise would not satisfy him. There could be no half measures. He would not settle for one crown while the other waited, or for one realm while the other remained beyond reach. This ambition, so pure in his youth, would later harden into obsession. But in these early years, it was merely a spark, a quiet fire glowing in the heart of a boy who would one day become king of two nations or fail trying. As Sigismund grew, his tutors were chosen carefully, men of learning and influence. They taught him languages, law, history, theology, and strategy. Latin and Polish were essential for diplomacy. Swedish was vital for home rule. He studied the Catholic faith intensely, guided by priests who saw in him the possibility of a king who could defend and expand Christendom. History lessons often included vivid accounts of battles and sieges, lessons in courage, honor, and ruthlessness. Sigismund learned the importance of alliances, treaties, and, perhaps most importantly, persistence. His tutors knew he was not an ordinary child. They noted his curiosity, his fiery temperament, and his tendency towards stubbornness. They cautioned against pride. They warned that ambition unchecked could lead to ruin. But their words often fell on deaf ears. Sigismund's mind, even as a boy, was already dreaming of thrones. Family life, however, was not simple. The Vasa dynasty was as proud as it was fractured. Sweden's nobles watched young Sigismund warily. Poland's magnates saw in him a foreign prince with claims that might override their privileges. Cousins, uncles, and distant relatives eyed his birthright with envy or suspicion. At home, Sigismund observed tension between his parents. John III was pragmatic, often stern, cautious about overreaching. Catherine, passionate and devout, encouraged her son to embrace both her Polish heritage and the Catholic faith. Their guidance often conflicted, leaving Sigismund to navigate the waters of dual expectation. From this, he learned lessons in diplomacy and strategy even as a child. He began to understand that ruling two nations would require more than bravery. It would demand cunning, patience, and occasionally ruthlessness. It was in these early years that the qualities defining Sigismund were shaped: ambition, stubbornness, religious devotion, and the relentless pursuit of power. He began to see himself not only as a prince, but as a king-in-waiting, one who would carry two nations on his shoulders. Yet ambition carried shadows. Early episodes of impatience, frustration at limits placed by tutors or nobles, and dreams of uniting Sweden and Poland hinted at the stubbornness that would later define his reign. Sigismund was taught to read, to write, to speak, to fight. He learned to observe, to plan, and to endure. Each lesson, each story, each whispered word of encouragement or caution fed the young prince's growing vision. He would be a king unlike any other, ruling two crowns, shaping Europe according to his will. Even as a boy, those around him could sense the path Sigismund would take. There was greatness, but also danger. The ambition to unite two crowns, admirable as it seemed, was also a spark that could ignite conflict. Stories circulated quietly in both Polish and Swedish courts. A prince born to rule, yes, but one who might fight as much against his own lands as against foreign enemies. Whispers suggested that stubbornness and pride, left unchecked, could become obsession. And so, from the very beginning, Sigismund III Vasa's life was destined to be defined by duality. Two crowns, two nations, two legacies, and a single unyielding ambition that would guide him through triumph and tragedy alike. In the autumn of 1587, a pivotal moment arrived that would shape the course of Sigismund III Vasa's life and the history of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The previous king of Poland, Stefan Batory, had died, leaving the throne vacant. Poland, unlike many kingdoms in Europe, did not inherit kingship automatically. Instead, it relied on an elective monarchy, a system both fascinating and perilous, in which nobles and magnates could choose a ruler. Sigismund, though still a young man, was carefully groomed for this moment. His Polish heritage through his mother, Catherine Jagiellon, lent him legitimacy. His upbringing in Sweden, in turn, imbued him with discipline, knowledge of governance, and a confidence that impressed even the most cautious Polish nobles. Yet the road to kingship was never simple. Several candidates vied for the throne, each backed by powerful factions. France, the Habsburgs, and local magnates had their favorites. Negotiations, bribes, and whispered threats filled the corridors of Krakow and Warsaw. Sigismund, guided by his counselors, navigated this labyrinth with patience, poise, and a growing sense of destiny. When Sigismund arrived in Krakow, the city shimmered with ceremony. Streets were decorated with banners bearing the coats of arms of Poland and Lithuania. Citizens crowded along the cobbled roads, craning their necks to glimpse the young prince who might become their king. The coronation ceremony itself was a spectacle of grandeur. Cathedral spires caught the sunlight, gilded altars reflected candlelight, and noblemen in velvet and brocade whispered in anticipation. Sigismund, clad in resplendent robes, felt the weight of expectation settle upon him. The crown, a symbol of authority, was placed upon his head not only by the church but by the collective will of a kingdom. For a moment, it seemed as though destiny had been fulfilled. Sigismund III Vasa was now King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. Yet the calm was fleeting. He would soon discover that a crown could be both a blessing and a burden heavier than the heaviest sword. Poland was not a uniform realm. Its sprawling territories were home to diverse peoples, religions, and local customs. The nobility wielded extraordinary power, often more than the king himself. In many ways, Sigismund's authority was symbolic, dependent on the cooperation of powerful magnates. From the beginning, tension simmered. Sigismund, young and ambitious, believed in centralized authority, the king as the ultimate decision-maker. Polish nobles, fiercely protective of their rights and privileges, resisted. Meetings in grand halls turned into arguments. Whispers of rebellion crept through corridors. Moreover, the Commonwealth faced religious divisions. Sigismund was a devout Catholic in a land where Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Orthodoxy thrived. While he hoped to unify his realm under faith and law, many nobles feared the imposition of religious conformity, seeing it as a threat to their own beliefs. Despite resistance, Sigismund sought to assert his authority. He implemented policies aimed at strengthening the monarchy and centralizing governance. Administrative reforms were introduced, taxes collected more systematically, and royal decrees began to shape the lives of ordinary citizens. Yet every measure met opposition. Magnates questioned his right to dictate terms. Towns and cities bristled at royal interference. The young king learned quickly that ruling Poland required diplomacy as much as command. Patience, strategy, and compromise were essential. Even at this early stage, Sigismund's ambition stretched beyond Poland. He never forgot Sweden, his ancestral kingdom. Every decision, every alliance, every diplomatic mission was colored by the knowledge that he might one day reclaim the Swedish crown. Marriage for Sigismund was never just personal. It was political. In 1592, he married Anne of Austria, forging a union that strengthened ties with the Habsburg dynasty and added legitimacy to his claims. Their marriage was celebrated with pageantry, music, and feasts lasting for days. Yet beneath the gilded veneer, ambition drove every move. Sigismund sought to secure his dynasty, ensuring that his heirs would inherit not just Poland but also the dreams of Sweden. Every ceremony, every alliance, every noble favor was calculated to advance his vision of dual monarchy. Even in private, Sigismund's mind was rarely at rest. He studied maps, treaties, and letters. He plotted, imagined, and anticipated. The young king's life became a constant exercise in strategy, a chess game spanning continents, crowns, and generations. The Polish nobility, or szlachta, held enormous sway. They were proud, independent, and accustomed to voicing their opinions, even to a king. Sigismund's early years were filled with cautious negotiation, as he attempted to assert authority without provoking rebellion. Yet stubbornness was a hallmark of his character. When nobles challenged him, he often responded with firmness, sometimes verging on inflexibility. He believed in hierarchy, divine right, and the sacred obligation of a king to uphold the law and destiny. This tension defined his reign. Poland remained under his rule, but it was never entirely his. He would learn, over decades, that ambition alone could not bend a country. Patience, alliances, and compromise were equally necessary. From his earliest years in Poland, the seeds of future conflict were sown. The same ambition that drove him to excel would also drive him to obsession. His desire for Sweden never waned, and his refusal to compromise foreshadowed the wars and struggles that would mark his later life. Even as he gained respect and influence in Poland, Sigismund remained haunted by the possibility of losing Sweden. He saw himself as a king with a mission greater than any single realm, a king destined to unite nations or to pay the price for trying. Thus, the stage was set. Poland became both home and battleground, a kingdom in which Sigismund would test his cunning, patience, and stubbornness. The throne he occupied would be both a prize and a challenge, shaping the man who would become one of Europe's most ambitious and controversial monarchs. In 1592, the death of John III of Sweden marked a turning point not only for Sigismund III Vasa but for all of Northern Europe. The young king, already seated firmly upon the Polish throne, now inherited his father's crown, becoming King of Sweden. For the first time, the dream he had carried since childhood, two crowns united in one ruler, seemed within reach. The Swedish crown was no simple prize. It symbolized centuries of northern kingship, the defense of Lutheran faith, and the authority over a kingdom that had survived countless wars, harsh winters, and political upheavals. Sigismund's arrival in Stockholm was greeted with a mixture of awe, hope, and suspicion. Though officially crowned, he faced an immediate challenge: governing a kingdom in which most nobles adhered to Lutheranism, while he himself remained a devout Catholic. Even before his coronation, whispers of tension reached Krakow and Warsaw. Could a king who ruled Poland, a staunchly Catholic kingdom, effectively govern Lutheran Sweden? From the outset, ruling both Poland and Sweden proved to be a monumental task. Sigismund spent more time in Poland than in Sweden, attending to the affairs of the Commonwealth, managing nobles, and consolidating power. He trusted his advisors in Sweden to maintain order, yet distance became a source of frustration for the Swedish nobility. They began to suspect that their new king was a foreigner first, a Pole second, and a Swede only in title. The tensions that had been quiet under his father's reign began to simmer into open resentment. The Swedish nobles, proud and independent, demanded autonomy and access to decision-making, challenging Sigismund's authority. In his own mind, Sigismund could not compromise. The dream of dual monarchy was paramount. Poland could not be sacrificed, and Sweden could not be neglected. He believed his rule could unite the North and East, bring peace, and strengthen both crowns. But ambition, as often in history, blinded him to reality. One of the most pressing issues Sigismund faced in Sweden was religion. As a devout Catholic, he hoped to subtly encourage the faith in a predominantly Lutheran kingdom. Even small gestures, attending Mass privately, supporting Catholic advisors, or appointing loyal clergy, sparked unease among Swedish nobles. These tensions were exacerbated by the Protestant Reformation's lingering impact. Sweden had fought to establish Lutheranism as the state religion, and any hint of Catholic influence was met with suspicion. Rumors circulated that Sigismund intended to impose Catholic rule, though the king often denied such intentions. The distrust between monarch and nobles grew, creating a fault line that would eventually fracture the kingdom. The Swedish council debated openly, sometimes vehemently, whether the dual monarchy was sustainable or whether a local ruler should replace Sigismund entirely. Sigismund's formal coronation in Sweden was a spectacle, blending ceremony with political necessity. Crowned in Uppsala Cathedral, he appeared regal and solemn, flanked by advisors from both Sweden and Poland. Despite the grandeur, the ceremony could not mask the unease. Nobles whispered in corners. Some plotted quietly, unwilling to accept a king whose loyalty seemed divided. Sigismund, though aware of the murmurs, pressed on with a vision of dual monarchy. He attempted to govern through correspondence, sending decrees from Warsaw and Stockholm alike, but distance limited his effectiveness. Policies often arrived too late, instructions were ignored, and his presence, when rare, could not fully reassure the Swedish lords. Tension escalated further as Duke Charles, Sigismund's uncle, emerged as a focal point for discontent. Lutheran, ambitious, and politically astute, Charles positioned himself as the defender of Swedish tradition and faith. He rallied nobles against the absentee king, framing Sigismund's dual monarchy and Catholicism as threats to Sweden's sovereignty. For many Swedish lords, the choice became clear. Either support a distant king whose loyalties were split, or embrace Duke Charles as a local protector. Sigismund attempted diplomacy, sending emissaries and negotiating with Charles, but his stubbornness and determination to retain both crowns left little room for compromise. Every refusal, every insistence on authority, widened the rift. By the late 1590s, Sweden teetered on the edge of civil war. Nobles openly defied Sigismund, refusing orders, withholding taxes, and aligning with Charles. In response, Sigismund attempted to assert authority through military presence, sending loyal troops to key regions. The stage was set for inevitable conflict. Two crowns, one king, and a divided nation. Battles were not yet widespread, but tension filled the air. Every council meeting, every noble's decision, every whispered rumor carried the weight of impending war. For Sigismund, the stakes could not have been higher. Losing Sweden would mean the collapse of his dual monarchy dream. Yet even as he plotted, Sweden's resentment simmered, and the seeds of rebellion began to sprout in the very halls he hoped would secure his rule. Amid political strife, Sigismund wrestled with personal doubt and relentless ambition. He understood the impossibility of perfect rule over two nations, yet could not envision relinquishing either. Each decision was weighed with the knowledge that the future of his dynasty depended on success in both Poland and Sweden. Late at night, he studied maps by candlelight, tracing borders, planning campaigns, and imagining a united Northern Europe under his dual crowns. Every plan carried risk, every misstep potential disaster, but he persevered. In these quiet moments, Sigismund's determination was absolute. He believed in destiny, in divine providence, and in his ability to unite kingdoms, even as the political reality threatened to shatter his ambitions entirely. Despite his careful planning, the rift with Swedish nobles deepened. Duke Charles's influence grew, alliances formed, and the king's absence from Sweden became a constant liability. Sigismund's dream of dual monarchy, once bright and intoxicating, began to show cracks. The stage was set for conflict, and the inevitability of confrontation loomed. Within a few years, Sigismund would face civil war, forced exile, and permanent loss of the Swedish crown. Yet even in these early years, his ambition and stubbornness made clear that he would not yield lightly. The history of two nations, intertwined by blood and ambition, was about to unfold. A story of war, pride, and the unyielding pursuit of a dream. By 1599, the tension that had been simmering for years finally erupted. Sigismund III Vasa, despite his efforts to govern Sweden from afar and maintain authority through loyalists, faced open rebellion. Swedish nobles, aligned with Duke Charles, refused to recognize his commands. The kingdom that should have been his birthright now threatened to slip entirely from his grasp. Civil war began quietly at first. Skirmishes, strategic blockades, and political maneuvering, but soon escalated. Sigismund's armies, drawn from loyal Swedish and Polish forces, clashed with Charles's supporters. The northern winters made campaigns brutal. Frozen rivers, snowbound soldiers, and supply lines stretched perilously across frozen landscapes. The fall from Sweden was swift yet devastating. Sigismund's dream of dual monarchy hung by a fragile thread as the rebel forces gained ground, taking towns, fortresses, and key positions throughout the kingdom. Sigismund's commitment to reclaiming Sweden drew Poland into conflict. The Commonwealth, vast and resource-rich, became the base from which he planned campaigns northward. Polish nobles and mercenaries joined his cause, while Sigismund himself coordinated logistics, supplies, and troop movements from Warsaw. Yet this involvement strained Polish resources. Wars are costly, and Sigismund's insistence on reclaiming Sweden meant prolonged campaigns, heavy taxation, and tension among the nobility. Some magnates questioned the wisdom of expending lives and wealth for a distant throne. Despite opposition, Sigismund pressed on. He believed that without Sweden, his vision of dual monarchy was incomplete. Each battle, each campaign, was another step toward restoring what he considered his rightful inheritance. The wars were not confined to Sweden alone. Sigismund's military ambitions extended across the Baltic, including campaigns in Livonia and Estonia. These regions, contested for centuries, became theaters of prolonged conflict. Armies marched through dense forests, over frozen rivers, and along stormy coasts. Battles were bloody and chaotic, often decided by terrain as much as tactics. Sigismund's forces fought with courage, yet each victory was fleeting. Resistance, both military and political, ensured that no campaign provided lasting security. The king's obsession with Sweden overshadowed the pressing needs of his Polish realm. While Sigismund focused northward, internal administration required careful management, diplomacy, and attention, a balance he struggled to maintain. Years passed with little resolution. Campaigns yielded occasional victories, but the Swedish nobles and Duke Charles proved resilient. Cities changed hands multiple times. Fortresses were captured, besieged, and recaptured. Sigismund grew frustrated. His patience, tested by logistics, winter hardships, and rebellious nobles, was stretched thin. Letters from Polish advisors urged caution, but Sigismund's vision of reclaiming Sweden remained unwavering. Even in moments of despair, he strategized tirelessly. Maps, letters, and intelligence reports littered his chambers. He calculated troop movements, negotiated alliances, and planned assaults with meticulous detail. Every decision carried the weight of two kingdoms. Every error magnified the stakes. Duke Charles, shrewd and patient, continued to consolidate power in Sweden. He gained the loyalty of influential nobles, strengthened military defenses, and won public support by portraying Sigismund as an absentee foreign king attempting to impose Catholic rule. Charles's strategy was subtle yet effective. He avoided direct confrontation when unnecessary, instead focusing on long-term advantage. By the time Sigismund launched a major campaign, Charles was ready. Battles became contests of endurance, with Sigismund forced to contend with both harsh winter conditions and a well-prepared opponent. The conflict was not confined to land. Control of the Baltic Sea was essential for supply routes and reinforcements. Sigismund's forces engaged in naval skirmishes, confronting Swedish ships under Charles's command. Ships braved icy waters, storms, and cannon fire. Sailors fought with determination, yet the sea remained an unpredictable adversary. Every naval encounter carried the potential to shift the balance of power, yet no engagement brought decisive victory. The Baltic campaigns illustrated Sigismund's obsession. He committed resources, manpower, and time to reclaiming Sweden, often at the expense of domestic stability in Poland-Lithuania. While Sigismund's armies marched north, Poland faced internal strains. Nobles questioned the king's priorities, some openly resisting taxation and recruitment orders. Cities demanded attention to commerce and justice, while border regions required defense. Every campaign northward drained resources and tested loyalties. Advisors warned of rebellion at home if wars continued without visible success. Yet Sigismund's focus never wavered. His vision of uniting Poland and Sweden under one crown was paramount, even as his realm risked instability. The wars took a heavy toll on soldiers and civilians alike. Winter campaigns brought frostbite and starvation. Siege warfare caused destruction of towns and villages. Families mourned the loss of sons, fathers, and brothers, while the king pressed onward, driven by obsession. Yet for Sigismund, the human cost was secondary to destiny. His dual monarchy dream consumed him. Each setback became a challenge to overcome, each resistance a test of will. History would remember him for this relentless pursuit, though his contemporaries often cursed the prolonged suffering it caused. By the early 1600s, it became clear that Sigismund's campaigns would not easily succeed. Duke Charles remained undefeated, Swedish loyalty had been secured, and the dream of dual monarchy faced its greatest challenge. Yet Sigismund refused to yield. Even in exile or in temporary defeat, he planned, corresponded, and strategized. His stubbornness, his vision, and his belief in divine destiny defined these years. History was being written in snow-covered battlefields, icy seas, and councils of anxious nobles. The long wars would continue to shape Northern Europe, leaving a legacy of ambition, stubbornness, and the tragic cost of a king who could not relinquish a dream. By the early 1600s, Sigismund III Vasa had turned his focus almost entirely toward consolidating his authority in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Though his dreams of reclaiming Sweden remained vivid, reality forced him to strengthen his base. The young king, once idealistic about unity, now realized that ruling Poland required constant vigilance. Nobles were powerful, factions divided, and every decision, tax collection, appointments, or lawmaking, was fraught with risk. Sigismund was no longer a distant prince. He was a king whose stubbornness and ambition defined every action. He spent long hours in council chambers, poring over letters from provincial governors, nobles' petitions, and intelligence reports about potential rebellions. Each decision was deliberate, reflecting a king who trusted little and insisted on obedience. Sigismund's Catholic faith remained central to his rule. He supported the Counter-Reformation, encouraging Catholic education, churches, and Jesuit influence throughout Poland. This earned him loyalty from devout factions but also suspicion from Protestant and Orthodox communities. He saw faith not merely as personal devotion but as a tool for unifying his realm. By promoting Catholic institutions, Sigismund hoped to strengthen central authority and reduce the independence of rebellious nobles. Religious policy, however, was delicate. Overreach could spark rebellion. Compromise risked undermining authority. Sigismund's stubbornness often led him to insist on Catholic influence even when caution might have been wiser. Even in peacetime, Sigismund maintained a strong military presence. He understood that power rested not only on law and diplomacy but also on the ability to enforce will. Polish-Lithuanian forces were drilled, organized, and prepared to suppress uprisings or defend borders. The king personally reviewed regiments, inspected fortresses, and consulted with commanders. His obsession with military preparedness reflected both his ambition and his fear of losing control. In private chambers, maps and battle plans littered tables, a testament to his relentless vigilance. Sigismund's stubbornness was both a strength and a source of tension. While some nobles admired his decisiveness, others resented his refusal to compromise. Disputes over taxation, military levies, and administrative reforms frequently escalated into heated confrontations. Yet the king's persistence often won grudging respect. He could be rigid, yes, but he was also consistent and deliberate. Nobles learned that while Sigismund could be firm, defiance came at a cost. His insistence on obedience and loyalty reinforced his authority in a kingdom where power was distributed broadly. Sigismund remained deeply concerned with securing his dynasty. His marriage to Anne of Austria had already produced heirs, and he was intent on ensuring the continuity of the Vasa line. Political alliances through marriage were also a tool for influence beyond Poland. He meticulously arranged marriages for relatives and sought to strengthen ties with the Habsburgs and other European powers. Dynastic planning was not simply personal. It was strategic, a means of reinforcing his authority and maintaining the dream of dual monarchy, even if Sweden seemed increasingly unattainable. Despite consolidating power in Poland, Sigismund could not relinquish his claim to Sweden. Letters, emissaries, and spies constantly reported on the political situation in Stockholm. Every development, every rebellion, Every shift in allegiance was scrutinized. His obsession shaped both foreign and domestic policy. Decisions in Poland were filtered through the lens of Swedish ambitions. Even treaties, negotiations, and military strategies were influenced by the hope of reclaiming the Northern Crown. This dual focus created tension. While he strengthened Poland, he risked overextension, alienating nobles and causing internal friction. Yet Sigismund remained unyielding. Ambition, tempered by stubbornness, defined him as a king who would not compromise his vision. Even as he governed Poland, Sigismund supported military campaigns aimed at securing influence in the Baltic. Conflicts with Sweden persisted, and regional power struggles demanded constant attention. Armies were mobilized, forts reinforced, and fleets prepared for naval engagement. Though Sweden remained beyond his control, these campaigns allowed Sigismund to demonstrate both ambition and capability. He balanced diplomacy with military action, always aiming to advance his strategic objectives. Stubbornness, however, came at a cost. Repeated refusals to compromise strained alliances, tested the loyalty of nobles, and drew criticism from both domestic and foreign observers. Some historians would later describe Sigismund as inflexible, even fanatical, while others admired his unwavering commitment to vision and duty. Every decision, every decree, every campaign reflected a monarch who believed deeply in divine right, destiny, and his role as a ruler of history. Yet the consequences were tangible. Unrest, conflict, and tension shaped the lives of citizens and soldiers alike. By the end of this period, Sigismund's reputation as a stubborn and ambitious monarch was firmly established. In Poland, he was respected, feared, and occasionally resented. Abroad, he was seen as a king with unyielding determination, whose ambitions stretched beyond a single realm. He had strengthened his kingdom, secured his dynasty, and maintained influence over Northern Europe, yet the dream of dual monarchy remained elusive. History would remember him as a king whose obstinacy was both his greatest strength and his most dangerous flaw. As Sigismund aged, the consequences of his stubbornness became more apparent. Conflicts with Sweden persisted, internal political tensions continued, and the weight of decades of ambition rested heavily on his shoulders. Yet even in his final campaigns, correspondence, and councils, Sigismund remained a figure of relentless will. He would rule Poland until his death, leaving behind a legacy defined by ambition, stubbornness, and the pursuit of a dream that, for many, seemed impossible. By the early 1600s, Sigismund III Vasa's dream of dual monarchy was irreversibly slipping away. Despite years of campaigns, diplomacy, and careful planning, Sweden remained under the control of Duke Charles, who had consolidated power and secured the loyalty of Swedish nobles. Sigismund, though technically still king in title, was effectively exiled from the kingdom he had long considered his birthright. Letters from Stockholm, detailing Charles's decisions and policies, arrived daily, reminders of the ambitions that could not be fulfilled. The realization was bitter. Sigismund's lifelong obsession with Sweden, the central focus of decades of strategy, had ended not in triumph but in loss. Yet he remained resolute, determined to maintain influence wherever possible, even if victory was no longer attainable. Though he no longer ruled Sweden, Sigismund continued to engage in military and political maneuvers to pressure Charles and Swedish forces. Border skirmishes and Baltic conflicts persisted, as Polish-Lithuanian troops clashed with Swedish mercenaries. The wars became a constant backdrop to Sigismund's life, a reminder of a dream lost but not fully abandoned. Even minor victories offered little satisfaction. They were ephemeral, fleeting moments in a lifetime defined by persistence, ambition, and stubborn resolve.
With Sweden out of reach, Sigismund turned fully to consolidating power in Poland. Governance became both a refuge and a challenge. Nobles continued to assert independence, factions jostled for influence, and religious tensions simmered. The king's experience and determination, however, allowed him to navigate these complexities. Administrative reforms were enforced, taxes collected, and military forces maintained at readiness. While the dream of Sweden could not be realized, Poland remained firmly under his control. Sigismund's focus on securing the Vasa line remained unwavering. His children, carefully positioned in dynastic marriages, would carry his influence into European politics for generations. Though the dual monarchy had failed, his efforts ensured that his dynasty maintained relevance. Europe would remember the Vasas not just for ambition, but for resilience, strategic planning, and enduring influence across nations. In his later years, Sigismund increasingly withdrew into personal reflection. Long nights were spent studying maps, reading letters, and writing directives. His solitude was both imposed by circumstance and chosen, a space to contemplate decisions, victories, and failures. The weight of decades of ambition and struggle was evident. Though a king in power, he had endured exile, rebellion, and disappointment. Yet Sigismund remained dignified, resolute, and steadfast in his belief that his actions were guided by divine will. Even in his final years, Sigismund's stubborn nature defined his rule. Nobles, while loyal in many respects, continued to test limits. Disputes over taxation, appointments, and military obligations persisted. Yet by now, Sigismund's authority was largely unquestioned. His long reign, combined with experience, resolve, and the respect he commanded through both fear and admiration, allowed him to maintain a stable rule in Poland despite decades of ambition, conflict, and setbacks. Throughout his life, Sigismund's obsession with Sweden shaped every decision. From campaigns and naval battles to alliances and diplomacy, his vision dominated both public and private life. Though the dual monarchy was never realized, the drive and determination he exhibited left a profound mark on history. His ambition inspired loyalty, provoked rebellion, and reshaped political dynamics across Northern and Eastern Europe. Sigismund III Vasa ruled Poland until his death in 1632. His final years were marked by reflection, consolidation, and meticulous attention to governance. He died as a man who had chased impossible dreams, confronted rebellion, navigated complex politics, and maintained unwavering belief in divine right. Though Sweden was forever lost, Poland remained under the Vasa dynasty, a testament to his determination and political acumen. Sigismund's life illustrates the dual nature of ambition. It can drive achievement, create dynasties, and shape nations. But it can also lead to obsession, loss, and enduring conflict. History remembers Sigismund III Vasa as a stubborn, ambitious, and visionary monarch, a king who dared to dream of uniting Poland and Sweden, who fought wars across the Baltic, and who governed Poland with determination despite decades of challenges. Though the dream of dual monarchy ended in failure, his impact on Northern and Eastern Europe endured, leaving a legacy of ambition, resilience, and the inescapable weight of personal obsession. The story of Sigismund III Vasa reminds us that ambition, while powerful, has limits. Dreams must be tempered with pragmatism. Stubbornness can both achieve and destroy. Yet for all his flaws, Sigismund's reign exemplifies a rare combination of vision, dedication, and unwavering belief in destiny. His life, filled with triumphs, setbacks, battles, and diplomacy, serves as both a historical lesson and a vivid tale for those who seek stories of kings, kingdoms, and the human desire to achieve the impossible.